So parents and practitioners, we're used to thinking about resilience in terms of mental health. You take a, you have a stressor and then you have the resilience to overcome that stressor. And most people, when they think of stress, they think of psychological stress. But
Yeah.
when we think of whole child resilience, we have to think from their immune standpoint, hormonal standpoint, brain standpoint. We are taking psychological, physical, immunologic hits every single day. I mean, we're faced with constant stressors. And the idea around resilience is building that foundation of strength and resilience.
Welcome to Demystifying PANS and PANDAS, the podcast where we uncover the mysteries, breakthroughs, and hope behind these life-altering conditions. I'm Dr. Nancy O'Hara, a board-certified pediatrician, educator, and advocate with over 3 decades of experience helping children and families navigate the challenges of neurodevelopmental and neuropsychiatric conditions, especially PANS and PANDAS. These disorders can feel overwhelming, but here we'll break down the science, explore transformative treatments, and share stories of resilience and recovery. If you've ever wondered what's possible for your child or how to find answers, this is the place to start. Let's dive in.
Hi, everybody. It's Dr. Nancy O'Hara again, and I am absolutely honored and thrilled to have Dr. Elisa Song with me today on the podcast. She's a Stanford, NYU, UCSF trained integrative pediatrician, a real slacker, and a pediatric functional medicine expert, mom of 2 wonderful, thriving children, and really on a mission to revolutionize the future of our children's health. She just wrote an incredible book, a national bestseller, Healthy Kids, Happy Kids, an integrative pediatrician's guide to whole child resilience. And it really is a great book. I highly recommend you get it. She's also started an online holistic pediatric resource to help practitioners and parents bridge the gap between conventional and integrative pediatrics with evidence-based, pediatrician-backed, mom-approved approach. And she's helped thousands of kids in her own practice get to the root causes of their health concerns and really empowering parents to help their children thrive by integrating conventional pediatrics with functional medicine, homeopathy, acupuncture, herbal medicines, essential oils, whatever works. And she's also the chair of A4M's pediatric education and has lectured around the world. And been featured on lots of podcasts and in print and online. And Elisa really is near and dear to my heart because she really looks at our whole child's health in the way that I am trying to help our kids with PANS and PANDAS. And she is a dog on a bone getting all of this done. So, Elisa, thank you so much for joining me.
Well, I'm honored to be here with you and all the moms and the dads and caretakers, grandparents listening. I mean, you were one of my first inspirations when I was starting out in this world, learning about functional medicine and really starting out, how do we help our kids with neurodevelopmental and neuropsychiatric concerns? I mean, you were right there at the forefront when we were training to be Dan doctors and which is
Yeah,
no longer, right? But that was from
yeah.
the start. And so I thank you for really paving the way for so many of us who are doing this much needed work.
Yeah, well, you've taken and run with it and done so many amazing things. So just tell our listeners, and by the way, we do have several practitioners that have been listening and have given us feedback and just learning on this too. So we're trying to talk to the parents and the families, but also the practitioners
Yes.
that are interested in revolutionizing their own practices, because you and I both know that we getting to the root causes, getting to how we help our kids is really how we can step outside our conventional medicine approach and really get our kids healthy.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that is I mean, I love that also we're able to speak in this way to practitioners. It's so important. I mean, we all know that the healthcare system is broken, but we're not going to change anything by completely dismantling the healthcare system. We need to arm and prepare those pediatricians, pediatric practitioners who are in the system and want to do better, want to know better, and
Right.
give them the tools to be able to do that. It is that is a challenge, right, to
Yeah.
really get there. But I mean, what keeps me going is there are so many practitioners who, once they get the taste, once their minds are open to what this thing called integrative and functional medicine is, they want that. They want more, and they need more
Yeah.
pediatric training opportunities.
Absolutely. So, how did your journey really lead you to integrative pediatrics, stepping out of that conventional box to focus on holistic wellness for our kids?
Well, I think I was, I guess, quote, lucky in the sense that I never had to step completely outside the conventional medicine box because I already started thinking I was going to be outside that box. Because when I was an
Mm,
undergraduate at Stanford, not knowing what I wanted to do, I really didn't think I wanted to do medicine because my mom was an OB/GYN and I just saw her working her bum off like day in, day out. And I thought, I don't know that medicine is for me, but I really want to work with children. So I thought I was going to be a children's rights advocate, a civil rights lawyer. I mean, that was my track in college. And then I stumbled across this flyer as a junior walking around campus for this was in the late 1980s for this conference for this the Academy, no, it's the American Holistic Medical Association, and which doesn't exist anymore. But that term, holistic medicine, I'd never heard it before. And
wow.
so my curiosity was so piqued. So as a junior, I drove myself down to the Santa Clara Convention Center and I listened and I learned and my mind was blown by these people that were just starting to get known, like Andrew Weil, Deepak Chopra, Joan Borisenko.
Yeah.
And I thought, you know what? That's the kind of medicine I could do. And so that's informed everything that I've sought out in terms of learning and doing and electives and even creating my own rotation through medical school and residency. And again, I didn't know what functional medicine was in residency, but I stumbled across another flyer when I thought, okay, I'm kind of burnt out with medicine already as a resident. I didn't see anything I wanted to do. I didn't want to be in the hospital. I didn't want to see, 20 patients an hour. And and so again, this flyer for this food as medicine conference. And
Yeah.
that I'm like, what is that? We can use medicine, food as medicine. And so I brought myself to Berkeley and I went to that conference again, mind blown. I heard from
Yeah.
this is now in the early, I guess it would have been in the mid 90s, late 90s. And again, I've heard from a very young Mark Hyman, Jim Gordon on, mind body medicine. And again, my mind was blown. And that's when I knew, okay, functional
Yeah.
medicine is what I want to do.
Yeah. It's so funny that I never realized we had those things in common. I was a junior in college and needed an internship for my neuropsychology, major. And I went to church one day and was talking to somebody, and there was a flyer behind them, the holistic care of children with autism. And I pulled that
Oh,
flyer
wow.
down, the whole flyer, and first became a teacher of child with autism. It was holistic in the term of educationally.
Yes. Yeah.
And, but just those little things, you never know what is going to change your path and inform where you go. And that's what we're trying to do for all these families now, give them pearls to help their children be healthier.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
practitioners too, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's, you listen and I listen. I mean, I started my practice in 2004, so it's been 21 years and I still every podcast, every interview you listen to, there's some pearl that you can take away from. So
Yeah.
I'm so glad you started this podcast because it is an endeavor, but
Yep.
it's so needed.
Yeah. And your book, A Healthy Kids, Happy Kids, really a gem. I'm training a nurse practitioner now, and I said, get this book, start there. Because she's very new to functional
Mhm.
medicine. But you talk about a concept there called whole child resilience. And tell everybody what you mean by that.
So parents and practitioners, we're used to thinking about resilience in terms of mental health. You know, you take a, you have a stressor, and then you have the resilience to overcome that stressor. And most people, when they think of stress, they think of psychological stress. But
Yeah.
when we think of whole child resilience, we have to think from their immune standpoint, hormonal standpoint, brain standpoint. We are taking psychological, physical, immunologic hits every single day. I mean, we're faced with constant stressors. And the idea around resilience is building that foundation of strength and resilience from the inside out so that your kids can bounce back no matter what quote hit they take. Because
Yeah.
it's not, we cannot keep our kids in a lonely little bubble that's hygienic, no stress, no demands. And in fact, having no stress and no demands is more stressful than having some stress and overcoming them. So as we
Yeah.
think forward to, what do we want for our children as they become young adults and independent adults? How do we give them those foundations of diet, lifestyle, mindset, all the things that are going to help them remain resilient, even if they have a big setback, a huge setback like PANS or PANDAS, or
Yeah.
some other chronic health concern that's going on. If you have those foundations, or you can build those foundations as they recover, we're not going to be in that holding our breath, waiting for the next shoe to drop, the next
Right.
flare, the next whatever it is. So that's why I really wrote the book, is for parents who are um, either, their kids don't have concerns and they just want to give their kids the best footing in life, or maybe there are concerns in the family, a lot of autoimmunity or neurodevelopmental concerns, and they want to see, can we do something to prevent that? Or for families who are already facing one of the many chronic health concerns like eczema, asthma, food allergies, autoimmunity, PANS, PANDAS, ADHD, anxiety, and how do we build that foundation for
Yeah.
life?
Absolutely. And you talked about diet and lifestyle, but we both know that the gut is at the center of everything. And what would you say to parents and practitioners about children's developing gut microbiomes and its influence on health and well-being?
Yeah, it is the cornerstone. And I
Yeah.
actually, as we speak, I'm in the middle of a 6-week seminar, an elective that I created for my son's middle school, 6th through 8th graders, teaching them all about their microbiome, their gut brain connection, their gut immune system connection. Now, for middle schoolers, what gets them? Their gut skin connection and their gut athletic, muscle performance connection. And so, just opening their eyes and also opening parents' eyes to the foundation of the gut microbiome, with the ripple effects that the gut microbiome has on virtually every single system in your body, can
Yeah.
help to reframe how we're eating, how we're living, how we're going about our day to day. Because our job as hosts of this internal ecosystem of trillions of microscopic organisms is to take care of them, that ecosystem within us, so that this ecosystem can take care of us. And so when
Yeah.
you frame it that way, I mean, these kids are amazing. They're going home and telling their parents about, what they learned about um, microbiome champions, and what did they, I mean, really learning about the fact that 90% of their serotonin is made by their gut microbiome. And that really gets a lot of these preteen teenagers who are really now, immune health is a little less of a concern. They're not getting all the colds and the flus and the, um, you know, stomach bugs as you are in elementary. But now the mental health piece plays a huge role,
Right.
right?
Right.
And so then they're
Absolutely.
listening and thinking, oh my gosh, I can't sleep. I'm anxious. I get too worried before my tests or my soccer games.
Yeah.
So it's powerful. And that's what I want kids and parents to be empowered to know. When it comes to the microbiome, some things are harder to shift, but we have so much control over what and how we live and what we put into our bodies to shape our microbiome, which then can shape our current and future health.
Yeah. Yeah. And what's so important in what you said too is how you're framing it. You know, you frame things differently when you're talking to an elementary school kid or a middle school kid or a parent that's never been down that road. And framing it so they get it is so key, whether it be the skin so they don't get acne or the serotonin so they understand where their anxiety may be coming from. That is such a key. And it's key for practitioners. You know, I was talking to Dr. Scott Antoine earlier, and we were talking about the neurolinguistic training he's doing, and the
Yes.
words that you use are so important in helping children, adults, parents, practitioners frame things in a way that people will get it, because this is so important.
Well, and it makes it relevant and important for
Yeah.
parents and for kids. And as we're thinking, I mean, we're right now, as we're speaking, we're really the listeners, whether you're a practitioner or a caretaker, you have a child likely with PANS or PANDAS, or you suspect you have a child with PANS or PANDAS, and there are, so many elements that need to be balanced and repaired, including immune health and brain health, mitochondrial health, and all of those. What I tell parents and practitioners, no matter what no matter what you're dealing with, if you start with the microbiome, it's going to have ripple effects. And
Yeah.
you and I know Dr. Alessio Fasano, who is this
Oh,
amazing pediatric gastroenterologist in Boston, who really brought to awareness the impact of gluten on all people, not just people with celiac disease.
yeah.
And he's credited with saying what happens in the gut is not like Las Vegas. What happens in the gut does not stay in the gut. And it's so true. And so when parents know, when you have a child with PANS or PANAS and there's this autoimmune inflammatory component, well, 80 to 90% of your immune system lies in your gut.
Yeah.
You have this neurotransmitter and brain imbalance, which is also inflammatory. And you realize that the vast majority of neurotransmitters, including serotonin and dopamine for attention and focus, and acetylcholine for the processing. How many of our kids,
Yeah.
all of a sudden, they can't remember their math and they were math whizzes before, right?
Yeah.
The connecting the dots, or melatonin, your gut makes 400 times the melatonin, more than your brain. And so, bringing it back to, look, no matter what's going on, it might sound, on some level, for some people, it can sound almost too simplistic. You start with the gut, but it can make such a profound difference.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you mentioned acetylcholine. You have an entire chapter in your book on the vagus nerve. And we both know how vital that is. But talk a little bit about optimizing the vagus nerve in optimizing the microbiome.
Yeah. And this is where, as you said, the languaging and how we frame things is so important.
Yeah.
There are, when I talk to kids and to parents and even practitioners, because I actually just did a master class to practitioners on using the elements in my book, and teaching parents in that way and kids in that way to empower them. So I talk about the 5 things for microbiome magic. And these are
I love
five
that.
things. Yeah, I mean, they're 5 things we do every single day. I'm not asking busy parents, kids who feel like they would rather do anything else but that, to do one more thing. I'm just asking them to think about the 5 things they're already doing and do them in a way that nourishes their microbiome. Do them in a way that creates microbiome magic every day. That's how we nourish our microbiome. We eat, how we breathe, that's the vagus nerve, and how we move, hydrate, and sleep. Now, breathe, or vagus nerve, that deserved its very own chapter. And in fact, it could deserve its very own book, right?
Absolutely.
Because it is so key to not just recovering and getting well, but staying well. And
Yeah.
that's the piece that, you and I know. I mean, we can, it may be a longer journey for some than others, but we have the tools. We can help kids get well, even quote, recover. But it's that, what I see in parents and even for kids, just holding your breath for the next cold. Are we going to have a flare? For
Yeah.
the next, trip up to Tahoe in altitude, and how's that going to be? Because the altitude puts stress on your mitochondria. And if we can know that engaging the vagus nerve and improving something called heart rate variability, which is a marker of your vagus nerve functioning, that is what's going to keep you well. And so the vagus nerve, for listeners who aren't aware, is the longest wandering nerve in our body from our brain, connects every single internal organ that we have. And one of the most important lines of communication, it's a two-way highway of communication
Yeah.
from the gut to the brain. But what most people don't know is that 80 to 90% of the communication actually occurs from the gut to the brain.
Yeah.
And when we call our gut the second brain, it's kind of I think a little bit of should be the other way around,
I agree.
right?
I
I mean,
always say it's not the second brain, it's
that's
the
right.
first
Like,
brain.
who's really in
Yeah.
charge here? But
Yeah.
when we talk about engaging your vagus nerve, strengthening your vagus nerve, which then will also strengthen your immune response, your mitochondria, your repair mechanisms. I don't call it mindfulness meditation, any mind body medicine anymore. I call it vagus nerve work. Just like we're doing
Uh,
immune work and mitochondrial work, and we're doing vagus nerve work to optimize your vagus nerve, because it needs to be put on that as important a level, and maybe even more important in the long run than any supplement that you can give. And
yeah.
so when we really engage our vagus nerve, we allow the healing process. Robert Navio talks about the cell danger response, and all of our kids who have PANS, they are stuck in the
Yeah.
cell danger alarm. I'm under attack. I need to put on all of my defenses. And
Yeah.
until their
Fight, flight,
cells,
freeze.
that's right. And until their
Yeah.
cells can move through that cell danger response back to healing, we're not going to get them completely well. And that last piece that kicks in that healing response is your vagus nerve. And
Right.
so, learning how to do diaphragmatic breathing or any number of mindfulness exercises for kids with PANS. I love tapping, emotional freedom technique, because it's a
Yes.
way that when kids cannot quiet their mind and they're too agitated to sit there and listen to a 5-minute meditation, or maybe their brain, their acetylcholine is not present enough, that they just can't connect those dots to do that. If we do tapping, where we're simply tapping certain acupressure points, and we're repeating certain affirmations, and you can even do it for your child as a caretaker, it really calms the nervous system down.
Right.
It can immediately get them out of fight or flight. And EFT, or tapping, has been shown to improve heart rate variability. So I love
Yeah.
that. I also love other more passive ways of engaging the vagus nerve until kids can start implementing some of the tools on their own. I use some vagus nerve devices, like the Apollo is one
Right.
for kids. It actually is authorized or appropriate for use in kids. And there are some small study, but a good study looking at improvement in ADHD symptoms in children. And there are others that I use that don't say that they are indicated for children, but as a practitioner, I feel comfortable, guiding kids through that. But
Right.
anything we can do, as you said, get them out of fight, flight,
Yes.
or freeze, get them into that healing parasympathetic stage, then no matter what you're doing, whether it's the IVIG or supplements or trying a new dietary strategy, it's going to work better.
Absolutely. And there's such simple but powerful
Mhm.
techniques. I mean, the diaphragmatic breathing or any of the other breathing that a lot of people have studied and found to be helpful, the tapping, all of these are inexpensive to, no money at all,
Yeah.
but so powerful and so essential for healing their microbiomes, but also their brains. their
Well,
minds.
it's fascinating too what if your microbiome is in a healthy state, that strengthens your vagus nerve, it
Yeah.
improves your heart rate variability. But also in children, there was a study that showed if you improve your heart rate variability, not only do you feel better, feel uplifted, but these kids' microbiomes also improved in their
Yeah.
diversity and function independent of diet. So if you have a child and it's so stressful on top of all the other stress that you're going through to think about changing their diet right now, well, then don't work on that. Work on the vagus nerve first because that will shift your microbiome. By
Right.
shifting your microbiome, you actually can start changing taste preferences and cravings, which then can make it a little easier to shift the diet in the way that you would like to. So it's fascinating.
Yeah. And you know, I think that's so important for people listening. So many of the people listening or watching may already have a child with PANDAS, may already been in the throes of a flare. And they're like, oh God, here we go again, telling me how to change my diet. But these simple things, like you're saying, changing the way the vagus nerve reacts by breathing, by tapping, by acupressure points, by
Mhm.
several simple things can actually change your child's ability to let that microbiome heal and then maybe be able to advance their diet in ways that are more healthy.
Yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
and I tell kids, teenagers, and parents when they're in the office and I'm talking about vagus nerve work, what I let them know is, when you do the vagus nerve work, you actually will feel more calm, have
Yeah.
more feelings of joy, feel more content, sleep better. But I let them know that that is actually not the real reason why I want them to do the vagus nerve work.
Hmm.
That to me is a really beneficial side effect. And I let them know the real reason is because when you engage your vagus nerve, you reduce chronic inflammation, you regulate your immune system, you regulate your brain chemicals and neurotransmitters, you balance your blood sugar, you balance all of your hormones that may be out of whack. So many other, you improve your mitochondrial function. And
Yeah.
so many other really, I would say, the primary reasons. And then, oh, by the way, you get to feel good while you're doing it.
Right.
So
Right.
reframing it that way too, because it must be a priority. A lot of us, and even practitioners, will put the vagus nerve work a little bit on the okay, I really want you to do this, but don't impart how important it is because we as practitioners don't really understand how important it is.
Right, right. And it is important, and it's important for parents too, not just in modeling the behavior to their children, but in helping to decrease their PTSD, to improve
Yes.
their ability to handle the flares, to handle all the stressors that come their way. So
I'll also
great for
put a plug in
everybody.
for practitioners listening because, it was very, very sad to me when I was reading this article from, it was probably late last year that came out as a survey of physicians and, pediatricians were among the top 5 specialties with the highest rates of burnout
Yeah,
and most likely to say that within 3 years they would be doing something different.
yeah,
And that's heartbreaking because we went into this field because we wanted to care for kids and nurture kids and and then especially when you step outside of the conventional medicine box, which is, it's a huge frightening step in itself. And
yeah,
then you're caring for really sick kids.
yeah,
And, and it's so important to also take the time out for yourself and model that for your patients that you are practicing self-care so that you can be available for your patients in the way that they need and your families that they need you to
yeah.
be. So,
Absolutely. Yeah. So, this microbiome magic and Alyssa, you are so good at the catchphrases too. The ways again framing this in such a wonderful way. I absolutely adore it. But you mentioned 5 things for microbiome
mhm.
magic. Do you want to talk about any others?
Yeah, well, let's talk about the nourish piece because that I
Yeah.
would say what I tell kids as they're, and I start talking to kids about becoming responsible, independent young adults from, I mean, I might start talking about that in 8th grade, but as soon as they become freshmen, I say, look, we have 4 years that you are home with us, with your parents First of all, it's a golden opportunity to, if there's any favorite foods that you like that your mom or dad prepare, or maybe grandma prepares, learn how to make them because
Yeah.
you don't have any, I mean, not that you don't have any other opportunities, but this is such an amazing time to do that. But I let them know the two skills that if you leave, um, well, I mean, they keep coming to me even as young adults, but if you once you're off after high school, whatever that looks like, right? The two most important skills I believe that I can teach you to become successful adults is to regulate your nervous system, right? And number two, learn how to read food labels like a gut
Oh,
hero, right?
yes.
Those two things, because those two things, as parents, once your kids are out of the house, and this starts even when they're, middle school, going out with their friends to the movies and choosing whatever they're going to eat, right? If they learn how to read those food labels and choose in a way that serves themselves and their microbiomes, their life can look completely different.
Yeah.
And it's not to say that they're never ever going to have the foods that kind of make you cringe, or maybe even you're having yourself without even realizing that
Yeah.
they're disrupting your microbiome. And I always let families know there's absolutely no judgment in where you're starting from, because
Right.
if I look at where I started from, I mean, it's nowhere near where I am now, but I didn't know until I actually knew, right?
Right, right. You can't know what you don't know. And
That's
that,
right.
none of this is shoulda, coulda, woulda. And I hate that for our families. It's
Yeah.
about what's one step now.
That's right. And
Yes.
so when we think about nourishing our microbiome, I actually split it up into two parts. The first part is what we want to try to get in. And that, when we think about, again, as pediatricians and then as parents, we want to try to make it memorable and fun, right?
Yeah.
So I talk about what microbiome champions we want to get in. What feeds and nourishes your microbiome? And so those are the three F's: fiber,
Mhm.
phytonutrients, which I let them know
Mhm.
that's actually a pH, but it sounds like an F, and fermented foods. And then you
Yeah.
break that down. Okay, what is fiber really? I mean, so many people know we should eat more fiber, but what is fiber? Well, fiber is the part of the plant. It's all plant-based foods. It's a
Yeah.
part of the plant-based food that we as humans don't use, but it's an essential part, because that part that we don't use is what probiotics, our beneficial bacteria in our gut, use to feed
Right.
themselves. And so we can also call them prebiotics. It's a little simplistic because there are some prebiotics that aren't necessarily fibers, but they're prebiotics that then feed our probiotics, and we need
Yeah.
that. It's just like if you're growing a tomato plant, the soil needs right nutrients, otherwise you're not going to get the healthiest tomato plant to grow. And then you make it really concrete. In the book, I have a list of all the foods, top foods, certain natural normal serving sizes, and the amounts of fiber, with the goal that most kids are probably going to be around 25 grams of fiber. But
Yeah.
then you make it concrete. Okay, a cup of raspberries, which many kids can easily consume in one sitting. I mean, my children could have 2 cups of raspberries easily in one sitting, right? 1 cup of raspberries actually has 9 grams of fiber. So that's not, I mean, that's easy to do, right?
Right.
Relatively easy for most kids. And then going through all the different ways that we can get more fiber in, and remembering that legumes, nuts, and seeds have really the most fiber
Right.
per per bite, per serving.
Right.
And then phytonutrients, that's color. So we talk about all the colors of, our whole gut rainbow, but the colors aren't necessarily just fruits and vegetables. You have to throw in there the nuts and the seeds and the legumes, and also the spices, right?
Yes.
Spices count. We were just talking before the interview about turmeric, but turmeric has curcuminoids. There's EGCG from your green tea. There's cinnamon that you can use. It has amazing
Yes.
benefits for your microbiome. In fact, one study I was just reading found that an Indian curry blend of 5 spices that included cardamom, coriander, and I can't remember the other three, after just one meal, shifted the microbiome for the better. Right.
Yes.
Yeah. So including your spices, and just, and I have this sheet that I give to parents and kids, that on the top says make your meals pop. So POP, with plants on purpose. So when we do
Mhm.
that, again, it's little steps. If
Yeah.
we now know plants are what feed our microbiome, then every meal or snack think, okay, how can I add one more plant?
Right.
If we just do that, we can. So in your on your oatmeal, could you add a little cinnamon? Or you
Yeah.
probably have maybe some pumpkin seeds or chopped pecans in the cupboard. Why not take that out and sprinkle it on your oatmeal? Right. So
Right.
we're just thinking, what's one more thing? And if you just have one more thing, then by the end of the week, all of a sudden you're like, oh, my child actually had a lot of plants this week.
Yeah.
Right. So, and
Yeah.
then the second part, the nourish part too, this is, I think as kids get older, really, really key. That's what we want to keep out, right?
Yeah.
And that's where we look at what food additives, the added sugars that kids are getting, the emulsifiers. I think if kids really learn how to keep their added sugars down and not substitute with the artificial acesulfame, potassium, and saccharin, and sucralose, that is one of the most important steps we can take actually as a society to improve
Right.
our global public health. I mean, everyone's talking about longevity. Well, one of the keys to that is understanding how to keep down the added sugars. And I actually had this, the place that added sugars come in the most commonly for children and adults now are these sugar sweetened beverages, right? You know,
Oh,
your
absolutely.
Starbucks mocha frappuccino. There's one, I mean, that has 55 grams of added sugar in one serving. Even, you know, those boba teas, those bubble, you know, tapioca teas. So I had a kiddo who she's a teenager. She started a job working at a local coffee shop. And over the past month, her anxiety has been worsening. She's getting more, quote, hangry attacks where she just feels a little shaky, like she needs to eat a lot. And then she'll come home and just, pile in whatever's around and having more trouble sleeping. And so we went through situationally, is there more stress? Not really. I mean, she's a senior. She knows what's happening. It's not, no more stress than usual. And exercise has been about the same. The only difference was the coffee shop. So I went
Mm.
through, and she's not having a mocha frappuccino thing every day. What she was having, which she thought was the quote healthier option, was a matcha latte with oat milk, right?
Yeah.
So we sat down and we looked at oat milk. Well, oat milk, actually, a lot of oat milk has added sugar to it. And then we calculated how much added sugar was in her matcha latte because she said, well, it's just 2 pumps of that syrup. Well, let's calculate it. It is better than the 55-gram mocha frappuccino, but it still had 32 grams of added sugar.
Wow.
And our
With two
kids,
pumps.
with
Yeah.
2 pumps and the oat milk, right? And our
Right.
children, 2 to 18 years of age, should have no more than 25 grams of added sugar in one day, 1 day. So already with that, she was having over. Now that doesn't sound like, oh, 4 grams over your usual allotment, but we're not factoring into account, then we just did kind of a little sugar inventory checklist of what she was eating. And we realized, okay, well, the toast, the bread that she's getting actually has 4 grams of teaspoon per slice. Can we swap that out? Let's look
Yeah.
at bread alternatives, right? The jam that she was having had more added sugar. Can we find a no sugar, fruit preserve? And so it's just looking and seeing, because on any given day, when I did this for my kids, and I already was an integrated pediatrician, and I was going through this exercise, and I said, let me do this for myself. And when I did it for myself and my kids, I realized, oh my gosh, my
Yeah.
kids on any given day were having almost like 70, 80 grams of added sugar because I was not reading every single label and
Yeah.
realizing that the vanilla Greek yogurt that I thought was so healthy for them in the morning actually had 25 grams of added sugar in one serving right there.
Right.
Right. And it's not that you have to read every single label every time. It's just when you start, you become aware of, okay, I'm not going to do the vanilla Greek yogurt. We are going to get the plain Greek yogurt,
Right.
add berries, and if we want a little extra sweetness, we can just add a little bit of honey or maple sauce. So it's
Absolutely.
or maple syrup. So it's becoming aware and then helping your kids make those shifts, those swaps. What can they get at the grocery store instead? Because it's not enough to say, don't eat, the Takis, fiery hot whatever chips. Don't get the prime, bomb pop artificial hydration drink that all your friends are drinking. That's not going to work. It's
Right.
okay. Let's not have this, because let's look at the ingredients, see what impact it could have on you, and let's go to the grocery store together and find what is equally acceptable, is going to look just as quote cool, when you're with your friends, and you're going to
Yeah.
enjoy, and I as a parent am going to feel good about.
Yeah, and that's so important. I mean, so many things here. I mean, I think that there are simple things. When you were saying the cup of raspberries, I can hear the parent in the back of my mind. My kid's not going to eat raspberries. But then you said, you know what? Just adding a little bit of chia seeds or some other seeds into that oatmeal, adding that cinnamon, adding those spices. And then, like you said, figuring out with your child what those things are, those added sugars, because we're all doing it. I mean, the
That's
other
right.
one I would say is fruit juices.
Oh, yes.
We think we're giving something healthy, but instead we're giving 30, 35 grams of sugar in one serving of fruit juice.
Yeah. And I tell parents, because that actually, thank you for pointing that out. That's a great, really important for parents to know, because a lot of parents do mistakenly think, well, that's getting some fruit in. But when we
Right,
think about it, it's very different than making your own smoothie, putting in the
right.
whole orange. I mean, you can peel the orange or the whole apple inside the blender, because in the factories, when they're processing fruit for fruit juice, they are high heat pulverizing it, extracting
Yeah,
every single bit of fiber. So you are only left with really the sugar from the fruit juice. Now, it's better than a soda. There it is going to have some, vitamins and minerals,
right.
but without the fiber to lower that impact of sugar, it's basically pure sugar that your
Yeah,
kids are getting. And so just being aware of that. I mean, they're really, apart from, we put maybe a little splash of sugar in the smoothie that you're making, much better to have the whole fruit or the smoothie. And I do have, and absolutely, when our kids are in a flare, they may be restricting what they're eating, so we want to be mindful of that. But I do have, kids who, no matter how restrictive their eating will get, they will still accept the smoothie that their parents
right,
make for them, right?
right.
And one of the tips is, if you put in a little bit of frozen cauliflower, or, just a few garbanzo beans, right?
Yeah,
The garbanzo beans actually add a creamy texture to the smoothie, really doesn't alter the taste. Cauliflower is, once you've steamed it, frozen it, it's tasteless in the smoothie. So trying
yeah.
to add some things into the smoothie that are going to add a little bit more of those, the fiber, the phytonutrients, really getting in, more of the gut microbiome nourishing nutrients that will help your child to heal faster.
Yeah, and those are the frozen fruits and vegetables, like the frozen cauliflower, even things you can add if a child won't take a smoothie to other drinks that don't necessarily change the flavor enough
Yep.
that the child's going to reject it. So think about that, even if it's not in a smoothie, too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if they're
Yeah,
doing soups, I mean, just pureeing a little bit of
yeah.
cauliflower in is really, it's an easy thing to do. That doesn't, like you said, doesn't alter the flavor. So
Right, right. Now, you and I both know, as do I think many of our listeners, that we're almost in 1 in 2 kids that have a chronic medical condition. And the health of our country, the health of our children is just so suffering. So how do you start? What are some proactive steps that we haven't talked about yet that you may help families with children with these chronic conditions to try to do?
you know, the foundations are going to be so key. I mean, we're
Yeah.
always working on those 5 things for microbiome magic, no matter what's going on with your kids. I mean, that is the foundation. But then, when our kids are having health concerns, we do very often. I never want to say all the time because I mean, nothing is all the time, but almost all the time, we're going to be looking a little deeper into your child's gut microbiome, seeing what the
Yeah.
imbalances are, because chances are there's going to be some element of dysbiosis or an imbalance of the organisms, microorganisms in your child's gut, which can mean not enough of the beneficial probiotic flora
Yeah.
or too much of the non-beneficial, pathogenic organisms, or maybe a combination of both. And then once we have that healing down, um, then it can be much easier to then settle the autoimmune inflammatory response that's going on, work on the mitochondria, support detoxification. Your microbiome, it's fascinating. I mean, probiotics have their very own cytochrome P450 detoxification system, which
Hmm.
is very similar to our liver's cytochrome P450 system, which is why so many environmental toxins the effects of that, including forever chemicals, can be mitigated by having the right probiotic beneficial bacteria. Because if we think about it,
Interesting.
we're breathing in our toxins just as much as they're coming through our skin. And the first pass is through our mitochondria, I mean, through our microbiome. So if our probiotics with their own detoxification system can kind of biotransform and make them into less toxic compounds, even better, right?
Wow.
And then we know that for many neuropsychiatric conditions, including PANS, PANDAS, there is, of course, leaky gut, which many people have heard of, but also endotoxemia. So there are these
Yeah.
gram-negative bacteria that can reside in your gut that we don't really want there, including Klebsiella or Citrobacter, E. coli, certain kinds of E. coli, and they have on their outer membranes, something called LPS or lipopolysaccharides, which
Yeah.
are very toxic and very inflammatory. So when you have these organisms in your gut, and you have a leaky gut, all of a sudden you have these organisms secreting all of this LPS that then slips into your child's bloodstream. And wherever they end up, they can cause problems, whether it's joint problems or brain inflammation. Or we know that this endotoxemia has been linked with, I mean, not just PANS, PANDAS, but we can see it in the research in kids with ADHD, in kids with OCD and ODD. And of course, in adults, we see it in all manner of neuropsychiatric and autoimmune conditions. So,
Yeah.
looking closer at the gut can make a huge difference. And I've had some kids, this kiddo, in fact, this family, PANS wasn't the issue, but it was autoimmunity. And the oldest daughter had Crohn's and rheumatoid arthritis. The middle son had rheumatoid arthritis. The youngest son was developing signs that he was developing rheumatoid arthritis. And the last piece of the puzzle that really pushed the kids over into remission was healing and eradicating the Klebsiella in their gut. It was
Hmm.
amazing. I mean, we did all of the dietary changes. We did we had them on a lot of supplements. One of the things that was harder to do because they were teenagers was to get a poop sample, right? So that took a little bit longer. And then when we finally saw that there was Klebsiella and we treated it, all of a sudden inflammatory markers normalized,
Yeah.
and they went into remission and they stayed there.
Yeah. Now talk about treating that because or anything like that because we're always balancing the use of antibiotics versus the use of herbals. And in that case or in general, what's your take on that? What's your approach?
I'm so glad you asked that because, there's not for, whether, I mean, I will say, especially in the case of a child with autism, for many kids on the spectrum, parents, can have in mind, many of these medical interventions that maybe led their kids down this path, right?
Right.
And so then anything conventional, anything Western, they don't want any part of.
Right.
And when I was first starting out, I was very similar in that regard, right?
Right.
And then you go through and you learn your balance, right? For the practitioners, the first instinct when you learn about this field of functional medicine and integrative medicine, the initial kind of thought is, oh my gosh, we have to throw out all the conventional medicine because that's what's keeping our kids sick. And then you realize, no, it's really just that in conventional medicine, many interventions and medications are just overused and misused. So if we judiciously and appropriately use them, they can play a very important role in healing. So for these kiddos, this family, I did use Septra, which is an antibiotic, a prescription antibiotic, because
Yeah.
I just wanted to clear it.
Right.
And then also because we had the tools then to rebuild their microbiomes, right? Which and so, but then, for things like, let's say, parasites, I'll often use a prescription anti-parasitic medication, but then also follow up with an herbal regimen for a few months, because oftentimes
Right.
I've just found one round is not enough. And then and of course you always also want to go with the parents' desires. So then I'll ask parents, look, we have the option to do a prescription medication. We can do herbals. Herbals probably take longer, but there are also some more synergistic benefits for the herbals. There's pros and cons to both.
Right.
But if there is a child who is fairly sick and I just want to clear and I know an antibiotic is going to work, a prescription, my tendency is to go for that.
Right. Right. And I think we do that very similarly. It's partly where the parents are, what their beliefs and understanding is, and also how acute, severe the situation is. Often they need that antibiotic in the short term. And like you said, we can follow that up with more good gut health and herbals and things like that.
Yep.
So yeah,
Yeah.
so with you on that. Now, with PANS and PANDAS, any post-infectious syndromes, but also just in general, our teens' mental health is in a state of emergency. So much anxiety, depression, OCD, tics, all of that. What's your, way of thinking about that? What's your understanding of the state of that? What do you do?
I still start with the gut, right? I
I
mean,
know, I
we
know.
mentioned
We
that,
have to.
yeah, and but it is true. I mean, anxiety is at an all-time high. Suicidal, ideation, suicide attempts. I mean, they're all just, devastatingly high, and even in our younger kids. I mean, even 8-year-olds, and so we can't, this is not just an adolescent problem.
Right.
And so, when we're thinking about mental health concerns, really understanding that there is a physiologic basis to it. It's not just in your head, in your brain, oh, it's just, too much stress. There is a physiologic component that oftentimes does stem in a gut microbiome imbalance, which then subsequently leads to a neurotransmitter imbalance. There is a stool test now that can look at um, your microbiome and see, do you have enough of the GABA producing species?
Yeah.
And also, how do you have too much of the species that break down GABA? And GABA is a very calming neurotransmitter. We need
Yeah.
that. So it can be very helpful to know that, because we could throw as practitioners all the calming, herbs that we want to, but if we know GABA is low, or, you have a really low levels of bifidobacteria, which many are responsible for producing serotonin and dopamine, we're going to target that. So I start with the gut to just have that foundation, but that's a little bit of a longer term. It takes a little while to rebalance and create a
Right.
new equilibrium in the microbiome. So it's not like all of a sudden you start taking probiotics, which also, listeners, please, it's not just about taking probiotics in terms of gut healing. There's, gut healing is more than just sprinkling in, or these probiotic supplements in. But it starts with healing that gut. Also in anxiety, we found that there's endotoxemia, and,
Yeah.
supporting the endotoxemia is really important. And then there's this sort of this uh, synergy of healing the microbiome so that your child's microbiome can make the neurotransmitters needed for your child's brain, but then also giving symptomatic support. So we know that there are things that can be very, very helpful, like L-theanine is very calming to the brain, can help support healthy serotonin levels. I use quite a bit of phosphatidylserine, which is a
Hmm.
phospholipid that's very important for brain cell membranes and communication, but also can reduce excess levels of cortisol. So help get our kids out of that fight or flight response. And this is across
Yeah.
the board, whether they have ADHD or anxiety or PANS, PANDAS, or are on the autism spectrum. If you are in fight or flight, phosphatidylserine can be really helpful. So theanine, phosphatidylserine, of course, magnesium, which is
Yeah.
such a calming mineral. So we look, and then we look to see also, is there an inflammatory component? Of course, with PANS
Mm.
PANDAS that is triggering. So we can't just stop there and say, well, it's just anxiety. Okay, anxiety is a symptom. What's triggering it, right?
Right.
What are some of the underlying factors? Is it a situational, you know, horrible family, situation, school situation, bullying, whatever it is, maybe compounded by microbiome disruption, too many ultra processed foods that are inflaming the brain, an autoimmune component, whatever it is.
Yeah. And it's very important to be that detective,
Yes.
to figure out, a lot of times we say, well, there's a lot of stressors at home. That's why they're so anxious. Let's put this medication on it while you deal with those stressors at home. But we're not getting at the root cause. How is that stressor changing our microbiome? How is that stressor changing our vagal nerve response? And what can we do before we get to maybe the SSRIs, SNRIs? What can we do to improve our microbiomes and give things like you're saying, the GABAs, the theanines, things like that, that can help decrease that anxiety for this
I will
child or
also
adolescent.
say too, yes, we need to do the detective work because from a conventional pediatric perspective, that detective work is not likely not happening,
Yeah.
right? On the other hand, too, it was a really great lesson for me, where this one child presented, very much like an acute PANS kiddo, and we're doing all of the detective work, and trying different supplements, and the thing with detective work is when you start looking, chances are you're going to find something,
Yeah.
that may
Yeah.
be off, that
Absolutely.
actually may not be the thing that's triggering the symptoms, right?
Yeah.
So, and then, a year later, and the family was going through a lot of upheaval, really, very sad divorce situation, going back and forth to the house. And so it became a little too stressful to follow up. And so after a year, they came back, different child. No interventions. I mean, they couldn't really keep up with the supplements, with all the different
Right.
things, but it was because the family life situation had settled. And
Right.
so now this child felt safe, and those
Right.
PANS type symptoms, yes, psychological stress can actually be a PANS trigger. I mean, we need to
Right.
understand that
Right.
too. But it wasn't, there were no major infections or mycotoxins or things to really treat. It was, I should have, in retrospect, really kind of double down on the vagus nerve work, right?
Right.
And on the nervous system regulation piece, and not necessarily kind of hunted for so many things. You need to do the hunting and the little detective work to make sure something's not there that's actionable. But then, sometimes there's not necessarily an actionable item in the sense of giving a medication or a supplement. It may
Right.
be that it's the vagus nerve work that has to be the priority.
Right, right. And I think no matter what the cause, whether you find another cause besides stress or not, dealing with the stress, giving them tools, whatever the underlying mechanism, is so important.
Yes.
The breathing, the therapy, it may be play therapy, it may be cognitive behavioral therapy, it may be marital therapy, but all of that is necessary for these kids. Now I have the converse story, which is a kid that had PANS PANDAS, and I thought we had treated everything fully, but there was a lot of turmoil in the family, and the dad traveled a lot for work, and every time he would come home, the kid would get worse.
Mm.
And, you know, we were talking about the family dynamics, and they were in family therapy, and we were working on their breath work and lots of different things we were doing. And finally, the dad got tested for strep and mycoplasma and was positive. And we
Wow.
treated the
Yeah.
dad, and the
Hmm.
kid got better.
Yeah.
And then all of those things that I was doing for months and months to help them deal with the stress, you know, when we finally treated the dad, everything else got better too.
Yeah.
So,
Yes,
yeah, you
absolutely.
know,
Yeah. It's being it's not I mean, this is where that's the art of medicine. It's not just
yeah,
stopping there, but thinking more broadly about, well, if things are not going according to the typical pattern that you've seen, let's think outside the box. Even again, outside the box, we're already thinking outside of, right?
right. And always going back, you know, that kid comes back after a year and isn't any better. All right, what is it that we missed? You know, yeah, you did
Yes.
that before, but now your home situation is better. Maybe the GABA now or other
Hmm.
things may work a little bit better. You
Yeah.
know, my mentor was Dr. Sidney Baker, who I say again and again is one of the most brilliant men I have ever met. And he always talked about, you know, have we done enough for this child?
Yeah.
And going through a door rather than a window. And I think sometimes when we get down this road, we don't necessarily reopen those doors
Hmm.
that we may need to. You know, we tried gluten-free before, but it didn't work. Well, now you're in a place where it may be
That's right.
able to be done.
That's right. Yep.
And revisiting those is so important.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
love that.
And you know, in your book, Elisa, you give so many practical pieces, recipes, practical ways that families can really work on this together. And I think that's so important. Any other of the practical aspects that you wanted to mention from your book in this microbiome management or the evidence-based approach at all?
Yeah. Yeah. I will say, sleep is probably the next
Ah,
priority,
right.
right?
Yeah.
Because sleep, and when you frame it in terms of the microbiome, sleep also can improve your microbiome, again, independent of diet, but it
Yeah.
takes just 2 days of sleep disruption to disrupt your microbiome. And our microbiome, our microbiota, I should say, all those probiotics, they have their own circadian rhythm that
Wow.
relies on our circadian rhythm. And in fact, some of our microbes have the opposite circadian rhythm, so that when we are asleep, they're awake doing their job of helping us
Mm,
detoxify and absorb things or keep things out and balance our immune system. So if we're not getting our sleep, then we're not allowing our probiotics in our gut to get their sleep and get their wake, a proper sleep wake cycle. So doing what we can. And that's where the things that we mentioned for calming, like the phosphatidylserine and the theanine, can be very helpful.
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, you're such a wealth of information, and I could talk to you for hours and hours. But first of all, where do people find your book?
My book actually is going to be almost everywhere books are sold. I mean, of course, please, support your local indie bookstores. I mean, that would be,
Yes.
would be great. But of course, it's available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Walmart online, and Target online. So anywhere really you can find that.
Yeah.
And yeah, I love giving lots of fun tips and the recipes in there. We didn't talk much about the fermented foods, but thinking outside the sauerkraut box too. And I
Yeah.
have a recipe for a fermented blackberry lemonade that you can make into popsicles, turn into smoothies. And so, because fermented foods have been found to probably, well, one study out of Stanford, improve microbiome diversity even better than fiber. And so, really trying to get fermented foods in can be very, very helpful.
Yeah. And you have all kinds of quizzes, exercises, protocols, lots of recipes, the fermented food recipes, the gut-friendly ones. I even learned a couple, you know, and I'm not a good cook, so it was great for me. So thank you. I mean, it just really is a roadmap. for raising resilient kids. And if your kid isn't resilient right now, for helping them move toward more resilience. I mean, it really is impactful. And how do they find you?
So the best place to find me is on my website, which is healthykidshappykids.com. And then also I'm most active on Instagram, which is healthykids_happykids.
Yeah. Yeah. And any last words of wisdom, of hope, of anything that you want to give to our families, our children, and our practitioners that may be listening or watching?
I will say well, this goes for parents and practitioners. Oftentimes we look back and we think, oh, I wish I had known this. Why didn't I know this sooner? I wish I'd known this when my kid was 9 months old. Or as a practitioner, I wish I'd known this, when I was starting out in practice. And so I always tell parents and practitioners, it doesn't matter where you were before, it matters where you are now. And the only reason to look back is to see how far you've come. And so I really, the parents listening and the practitioners listening, you are here because you are aware of this thing called PANS, which is a huge step for many, right? And you're here to get more knowledge. And that's how we make a difference.
Yeah, such good words. And please take them to heart, parents out there and practitioners. You can't know what you don't know. And just listening, just learning, just reading that incredible book, can get you to the next step. And then you're going to make some missteps too. That's okay. Just making the next step that you can.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, Elisa, thank you so much. And look forward to seeing you soon in the future at all of our endeavors. And thanks, everybody, for listening today.
That's it for today's episode of Demystifying PANDAS. I hope you're walking away with insights, tools, and hope to help you and your child on this journey. If you found today's conversation valuable, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Share this podcast with anyone who might need it. It could be the lifeline they're searching for. And if you have a moment, leaving a review helps us reach even more families who deserve answers. Also, for more information, training, and community, check out our website, drohara.com, and join our annual membership. And remember, every step forward, no matter how small, brings us closer to healing and understanding. Until next time, be present, be hopeful, and we look forward to seeing you next time on Demystifying PANS.